Hey, join us for another episode of the On.NET Show. Today we're going to be talking about how you get started with Azure, going from zero to hero in no time. Check it out. Hey, welcome to another episode of the On.NET Show. Today we're going to be talking to Christos, and he's been building apps for Azure, starting from scratch. And we thought, you know, you'd be a good person because there's probably a lot of customers out there that are starting from scratch.
Yep.
And I think, you know, you told me you started with just our documentation and our samples. So how the heck did you do that?
Well, we had a challenge in our hands, and we needed to build something which we wanted to demo at Connect this year with Scott Hanselman on stage. And the problem was taking an image and analyzing the image and then using that to create something on Azure, which was resources.
Okay.
And we started with nothing, right? So it was just an idea. It was a beautiful idea, and everybody said, can it be done to begin with? So my first goal was to create a proof of concept. But at the point that I started the project, I only had a very vague idea of what services or how we could approach solving the problem. And to do image analysis, as I found early on in the process, it's very, very hard. Like if you want to do it yourself.
If you do it yourself.
It's doable, but it's very, very hard. You need a lot of resources. And at that point, I thought there must be a better way.
Yeah.
You know, better people have tackled this problem better than me, I'm pretty sure. And I came across our cognitive services. Now, I've used cognitive services before for smaller things, but never for images. So it was, how do I do it? And the documentation was fantastic. Like you start from scratch, you deploy the resource on Azure, and then the next thing you need to do is decide which service you want to do. We have a couple of competing services and different variations of these. So we have the computer vision, which can do analysis on images to return tags and what have you. We have the Bing Vision search service, which allows you again to use the Bing engine to do searches on images and then get some data back. And then we have the custom vision, which allows you to create your own custom model.
I see. So, and we love all our children equally.
We love all children equally, and in fact, you need to use the right tool for the right job. Right?
Yeah. So by the way, I think we actually forgot to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. So how about we do that?
Sounds good, yeah. My name is Christos Matskas. I work as a product marketing manager for DevTools. Anything that has to do with mobile gaming and Azure DevTooling. So anytime you use our tools to do stuff on Azure via Visual Studio or the command line, then that's the stuff I market.
Okay.
And as a developer, I'm really passionate about these things, and I always like to try them out. And this project gave me the opportunity to, again, bring some of these things together via Visual Studio.
Okay. Right. So from what I understand of what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about your example, the particular thing you were trying to solve, but kind of use that as just an instance of how someone would start from scratch with Azure.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And especially how somebody will start with Azure and, you know, solving things like how do I analyze text? How do I analyze images? And which service should I use and when? Okay. So to begin with, if you never used that before, if you never used the custom vision or any of our cognitive services, we have a really good site that can take you there. So cognitive services, and then we have a whole list of AI-assisted services of vision, knowledge, speech, search, and language. And for us, vision was the one that we wanted to use.
Right, so these are a lot of kind of human-oriented computer services.
Yes, yeah. And lots of different services again. Do you want to analyze a face and get a sentiment out of that? Do you want to analyze context and maybe do some moderation on the text, right?
Right, so surely before you built an app using these APIs, you'd gone to university for all these things. Is that correct?
No, I am a total noob in machine learning and AI. In fact, when I started approaching the problem, it was a very daunting task, right?
Yeah, so were your palms sweating?
It wasn't palm sweating, but it was definitely a case of doing a lot of research, trying to find out what's out there in the .NET space, especially because I was doing a Xamarin app with .NET, so I wanted to see how that would run. And then I came across the cognitive services, and I thought there must be something in there that can help us out. And we had two problems to solve. One was understanding handwriting and text on whatever you put on the whiteboard, and the other one was picking logos from our services and then analyzing these again. So using these two services combined would create resources on Azure.
And when you said this before, resources on Azure, what do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is you put something on the whiteboard and then you take a picture of that.
Okay, with your phone.
With the Xamarin app that we created. And then we use Cognitive Services to analyze that image. It returns back a list of services. And then we take those and say, would you like to deploy them to Azure now? And then you press the deploy and then it happens automatically. So you go from whiteboard into Azure. Let's say you're brainstorming with your team and you want to know, how much is this going to, how is it going to look, how much is it going to cost, and how long is it going to take to deploy, in fact. What we do there, we give you a true representation of that, but you don't have to use ARM templates or the usual route. It's a nice onboarding experience.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, and the app is actually open source, so if I switch to GitHub, we have everything for you to try out. We even gave you the resources. You can go and train your own model, but we thought that this would be probably too much effort, so we have a public endpoint that you can use right now to run the app against our cognitive services, which we trained as well. So this is all open source. Right.
Very nice. Microsoft just seems to be about all open source these days.
Yeah, we love to open source stuff, and we accept contributions, and if anyone has ideas or they want to extend the solution, then we're more than happy to accept them.
Cool.
And again, you said, how do you do that? How do you redeploy to Azure, right? So that's the other thing. If when it comes to deploying things to Azure, we have lots of different avenues, but we wanted to do everything in .NET. And for that, we have an amazing SDK. I don't know if everyone knows that.
Right, so this is the Azure SDK that we're talking about.
Yeah, this is the Azure Fluent API SDK.
Okay. And one of the things I noticed, so I'm an Azure SDK user myself, not completely surprisingly. And so when I first started using Azure SDK a million years ago, I would kind of go down the MSI route.
Yeah.
Install this thing onto my box, and then somehow Visual Studio would know, C program files, blah, 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 is where this assembly was going to come from. But at some point there was kind of a transition made a few years ago, and now it just seems to be mostly NuGet delivery.
Absolutely.
And now I was actually writing, I was telling you earlier about this tool that I was writing, I think on the weekend or something. And I just go to NuGet.org, type Azure Storage or whatever, it comes up. Just actually now they have the nice .NET CLI thing. I just literally copy and paste that into my terminal window, and I'm just off to the races. Correct.
And again, because we want to make things as portable and open source as possible, we also made that library available as .NET Standard library.
Yes.
Which means they can run on the phone, or it can run on your IoT devices, or it can run on your full desktop FAT client. And it gives you the flexibility to choose whichever model you want to deploy stuff.
Yeah, so I hear you saying the .NET Standard thing is working.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the whole app was based on portability and making it as modern as possible. So .NET Standard was something that we focused a lot, and the class library that we created to drive the whole business logic was based on .NET Standard, which means that we can take that out of the mobile app, put it inside a function, and run it, and we'll do the exact same thing. Put in a website, and we'll run exactly the same if you're running ASP.NET Core, or put in a desktop client behind WPF, and it will still run and consume it in the same.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
It is, yeah. It makes you choose the right tools for the right job again.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly the outcome we wanted when we were designing that.
Yep.
So super happy to hear that.
And as a consumer of that service, it's amazing to be able to do that.
Okay, so let's keep on going.
The other thing I want to talk about is that when we were looking at how we were going to create the backend for a mobile app, we had a couple of choices, and for this design path, we decided to make everything self-contained within the phone. So the .NET Standard library drives the business logic. We call to the cognitive services, which is running on Azure, and then we get the results back and deploy to Azure via the Azure SDK.
Yep.
However, there were other approaches as well. So we could go down the path of having an API driving the whole business logic. And again,
right, on an API on Azure.
On Azure.
So this is kind of like the middle tier sort of concept.
Yeah. And have a very thin front-end layer, which could be a mobile app or a web app again. I think down to the constraints of the project, we wanted to make everything self-contained and people be able to carry their phone and run it with them. And we could have taken it one step further. So if I switch to my custom vision project, when you create a brand new project, you actually have the option as you decide what you want to do or which services you want to target to make it a compact. And that compact actually makes it exportable. So rather than running it on the Cognitive Services service, you can export the model that you've trained and put into your IoT or your Android device.
That's amazing.
And run it there.
Right. So I can imagine from an offline scenario, that would be super useful.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't have to deploy something to Azure, but a different scenario, that would work perfectly well. And again, this is something that we need to make people aware of, that you can run it on the phone. And then on the other side of things, like let's say I want to run Cognitive Services, but I want to scale out because I've got millions of requests coming in. Now, this might be something that becomes a blocker for you. So what we have actually started looking into is running your Cognitive Services on a container.
Nice. One question, though, about the compact thing. Yep. Compact to me, so they use the word compact instead of, say, offline.
Yeah.
Does compact mean that it's less capable?
No, it means that once you train your model, then that's your static model. So if you want to add more things, then you have to redeploy your app or whatever code you have running that against that model against the next one. So it's not as easy to update or as easy to grow. But once you deploy that, it becomes quite static. Like it's more compact, and that's the whole point. You decide what you want to run against. If your API or if your needs change, you need to redeploy that.
I see, which is obviously fairly significant with, say, an iOS app.
Yeah. Well, I mean, these days it becomes a lot easier to have that kind of a CI/CD process that I update something, I export it and stick it into my CI/CD pipeline, and eventually via App Center you can push it to your users. Okay. So it's not as hard, but it means that there's a lot more manual maintenance. But at the same time, you gain that portability.
Okay.
That we talked about. So I did say about container support for custom vision, right? So there are specific services under Cognitive Services umbrella now that we're starting to push into containers. So rather than running on our platform, you can run it on your own container. You can run it on your own AKS cluster. You can run it anywhere you want, and that makes it a lot more portable and a lot more scalable.
Right. I think when you said platform there, you were saying, I think you really meant service.
Service?
Yeah, like instead of necessarily running in Cognitive Service itself.
Correct.
Yeah, you can run it in a environment that you have more control over.
Correct. I mean, it can still be an AKS service on Azure. It can be a Service Fabric service, but you control a lot more how when you want to scale up or out.
Okay. Can you give an example? So I understand what those English words mean.
Sure.
Can you give us some example of what you might be trying to achieve or what might drive you to go the self-hosted route on, say, AKS?
Yep. One case would be having your data closer to your running applications.
Okay.
The other one would be your data tenancy, where your data gets processed. So some customers like banks may not want to run their data on the cloud for whatever privacy or compliance reasons.
So they could run just compute in the cloud.
Yes.
And then maybe there's a bit of data at a time that's in the cloud, but then through like Direct Connect or whatever it's called, like whatever the VPN thing is with Azure, then they push that back into the on-prem thing. Actually, or is that not how it works?
Well, that's a hybrid scenario, which is again supported. But in this instance, all you need to do is take the containers with the services, deploy them to your, let's say, Kubernetes cluster on your on-prem environment.
Oh, I see.
And all you need to do is provide a key and the endpoint to your Cognitive Services that you have on Azure. So you need to deploy a Cognitive Services service on Azure, an instance, but this is only for your billing. Like we need to keep track of what you're doing and how we charge you, but this is the only requirement. Everything else runs locally on your own environment.
I see.
And that's, I mean, and in fact, I was so curious about to see how this one's running. I have a demo if you want me to show you that.
Okay, great. That sounds interesting.
So I've already downloaded and have the container ready to. What is that? YouTube. Totally wrong. Sorry.
You're watching YouTube at work?
I know.
Oh my gosh.
This is my personal laptop, man. Come on.
Okay, wow.
Right. So I've got a console app that I have ready to roll right now. And what I've done here is I have the container ready to run. So spinning up the Docker container.
Yeah, I have to admit, I was watching YouTube at work this morning too.
And yeah.
Okay, so, yeah, this looks familiar.
So what we have here is we have an endpoint. You see we have a metric that we're pointing to an actual instance of our API. And
Right, so this looks like a ASP.NET Core API.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
And then down here you have the local endpoint that you can hit. And in fact, we can put this to test. So if I come up here and open a new browser and then put it there. Kaboom.
Nice.
So that tells us that the container is running locally. But if I wanted to test that, we have a Swagger.
Right,
endpoint.
and since this is a MacBook that you're currently using, that's ASP.NET Core running on a Linux container.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Core, open
So
source.
those are probably the container images my team ships.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
See, it all comes together.
It all comes together.
One Microsoft.
Yeah, my team's doing that for a reason, it turns out.
And from here, you'll notice that I have selected the Recognized Text Cognitive API, right? So I want to send an image that has some text in there, and I want to recognize what that image does. And we can use different ways to test that, but we'll go down the easy route of actually.
So yeah, sorry, I can't quite entirely see your screen, so which is fine.
There you go.
But I understand what's showing. This is the Swagger view of your endpoint. Where is this being served from?
From a local container running
From
on a
that
local
same
machine.
container or a different one?
This is the same container, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Very nice. I actually did not know that ASP.NET exactly did that.
Yeah, so I think Swashbuckle is the NuGet package that allows you to do that.
Oh, okay. Then that all makes sense. Okay.
And I think it's not even called Swagger anymore, it's called OpenAPI.
Okay.
So let's keep some people happy with the naming
with the
consistency.
naming. Yeah.
And you can actually try it out from here. So it says, what do you want to try? And right now we have a bit of a limit because we're still in preview, so we can only test printed text. It's not that taking a picture of your handwriting and then putting it, but for anything printed, and then I can browse to an image. And in fact, here I have an image that contains some text. And I need to execute now. So this does the posting to that API endpoint.
Yep, totally.
And I will come back with some results in a couple of seconds.
Right. So the data though is this whole thing is entirely staying local.
Running locally.
Yeah, we did not push to some Azure endpoint.
The only thing that we did is actually call our endpoint for cost.
Yeah, yeah.
And because I'm running under the preview and the free tier, in fact, it doesn't cost me anything to run this thing. I could do quite a few calls. Now, for the results, if you are running your own API, you need to go back and interrogate this URL.
It's being helpful.
There you are. Yeah, that's something that is documented. So you don't get the results back straight away. It tells you where you can find the results. So we could do a post, or we could just we can do a get. And this is what you get back. Like, this is all the text that we got, and you can see authorized to access this page. Access, here's an additional tips. So this is the image I took, and then I processed that, and it got every single word or sentence out of that, and it sent the results back.
Wow, very nice.
Yeah.
So this is basically like a OCR type scenario.
It is. That's exactly for that. I mean, they're working right now to have handwriting as well added to that, and one of the proof of concepts I'm working against is take the code that we have for our application to do all the business logic, push it into a Azure Functions-based API that calls into all these things, and then have a Kubernetes cluster running my containers. So I'm decoupling everything and then making it more scalable just to see how it would perform.
Makes sense. So let's go back to the premise that we started with, which is you used a lot of words, a lot of technical words, and this yeah, it seems kind of complicated, but you told us that you didn't know anything about this. So I guess kind of recap, what was the, in like a minute, what was the process you used to kind of get here and learn all these steps such that, because you sound like you know everything about what's going on here. How did you learn that in such a short period of time?
It was mainly about following our documentation, right? We have excellent documentation on docs.microsoft.com that explain how to use each service, and make the right decisions as well based on what you need to do and which tools you need to use. So for me, it was a no-brainer to use .NET to create a mobile application.
Well, that's clearly true.
Yep. I mean, how can you go wrong? Xamarin was the no-brainer for creating the app to target both iOS and Android, so no code duplication. And then taking the existing skills to use the Azure SDK, which is a net standard library that can run anywhere, and then using a service that can analyze our data and return something meaningful back. And that was the Cognitive Services family of services.
Makes sense.
Text and vision.
And you told me before you started this project, you were also not a container expert either.
No, sir.
Yeah.
I mean, again, our documentation is excellent. We have some really good images, and Microsoft has contributed quite a lot as part of the .NET Core drive to make this as easy for everyone as possible. Visual Studio has the tooling there to allow you to add these very easily, and then it's all about reverse engineering, right? You take what you have there and then try to work out what it's doing at every step, and then putting it all together. Working on individual bits and then trying to put everything together. And that was my approach.
Okay. So I think what I'm hearing is the people who are watching this video, they should feel confident. If they have a project that they're assigned to, much like the one you got assigned to, they should really just jump in, and they're probably going to be successful.
I hope so. And if they're not, they should come back and give us some feedback so we can help them out being more successful in what they do.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you for being on the show today, and I think this was just a great example of how someone can take a need and then make that a reality with
using our tools.
ASP.NET Core, our Docker containers, Cognitive Services, and a bunch of other Azure services.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Well, this has been another episode of the On.NET show, and we learned about starting from scratch with an Azure project and how it can be successful. Thank you.
Thanks.